Hello and welcome to Dig It. I'm Peter Brown and hosting the show with me today is Chris Day. Hi Chris.
Hi Peter. So today on Dig It we're joined by two guests, Peter. We've got Jill Groombridge from the Plant Heritage Charity, and we've also got a National Collection holder, Jonathan Shepherd. So we thought it'd be quite nice to kick off this podcast by chatting to the actual Plant Heritage people behind the National Plant Collection. So we're delighted that we're going to be joined by Jill. Now, I caught up with Jill back in February at the Garden Press Day at the Business Design Centre in London, a very chilly day. And I know Jill was very keen to chat to us about the wonderful work Plant Heritage do, and of course the National Collection holders across the UK. So we're delighted that Jill has joined us today. So Jill, can we ask you, first of all, by explaining a little bit about the Plant Heritage Charity?
Oh yes, certainly. The Plant Heritage is all about saving garden plants, conserving the diversity of plants in the UK. And we started way back in 1978 when Chris Brickell, the Director General of the RHS, convened a conference that brought together about 100 representatives from botanic gardens and colleges and nurseries, because at that time there was a concern simply about losing the diversity of plants in gardens and what people were growing. And so from that point, we were previously called the National Council for the Conservation of Plants and Gardens, and that's how we started out. And then we're 45 years later, we have a very strong and diverse range of national plant collections, and we've achieved a milestone of 700 national plant collections.
Wow, 700! You got 700 national collections, and what makes up a collection? Is it just one variety of plant or one species of plant? How do you class?
Yes, and national plant collections are all unique and individual, although they're not always run by individuals. We have national plant collections at botanic gardens and large public gardens like, RHS Wisley, Kew, Savile Gardens, and down to nurseries. People have collections in allotments, and then you have quite a number of individuals who have collections in their back gardens, and more recently, obviously, the popularity of indoor plants.
You can have an indoor collection. Wow. Okay.
Oh yes. Yes.
I'd always assumed it was outdoor plants, but that's interesting.
No.
Cool.
No, I mean obviously indoor plants can be sort of the warm greenhouse plants, the plants where they need warm greenhouses, and obviously in the last year that's been a challenge for some collection holders with the rather interesting heating bills. But then obviously some people have got house plants simply in their homes, and there is a lot of variety and range in house plants.
Okay, so with regards to sort of the plants that people are collecting, there's no sort of criteria as to what is a good collection, as it were. You can have anything from apple trees to, I'm going to say, wheat plants, or...
Yes. I mean, the key to a national plant collection, a national plant collection, in simplistic terms, is a living library of plants. It's a living resource of plants. And the idea of a national plant collection is it's open for contact. It could be open by appointment. It could be a garden that's already open to the public. And people can talk about plants or email, exchange information, or they want to might exchange plant material. But the idea is that we list them we produce a directory, the National Plant Collection Directory, and we list all the collections in the directory so that people can get in touch with experts, so that we can share information. And if we share information and we share plants, we're saving plants. They're not becoming endangered. But not only that, within all that process, you're quite often sharing knowledge, and people don't realise that they're sharing knowledge. And that's a fundamental point to looking after plants, I feel.
Yeah. That's a great...
But sorry, to answer your original question, I think you asked, the variety of collections. Another key thing for a collection holder is they have to be passionate about the plants they're growing, because the collection will not be successful if someone doesn't feel the passion. And in other words, the collectors, they love collecting a particular plant. They love every aspect of the plant. They want to research it. They want to keep the records. They're sharing and talking to other experts in these plants. And so it's a sort of a community thing in many ways, but the collection holder is the sort of the main, or what we call the public resource, for want of a better word.
Yeah. So that sort of brought me on to my next question about what inspires people. I mean, yes, the passion, as you're saying, to develop these. It does seem, though, I don't know, Peter, such a huge responsibility to take on this sort of. I mean, it is to say a labour of love is probably an understatement, isn't it, Jill?
Yes, it is. It is a huge responsibility in some respects. But, at the end of the day, people do their best because they love the plants they're growing for. And obviously, if it's in an organisation, there's always someone who's responsible for looking after the plants within an organisation. And, inevitably things happen. A disease might come in, an environmental disaster. The winter last year has certainly had an effect on a couple of collections. I know I personally have lost quite a lot of plants. So there's some things you can't sort of mitigate for, but we do ask collection holders to generally have 3 of each plant, but not when it's like trees. You can't expect to have 3 massive oaks of every type of oak tree because you'd want quite a bit of land for that one.
Yeah.
So, you've got to be realistic about these things. But, it is important that in general you have 3 plants of each. And it's usually what's available in the UK. And, that can vary depending on the plant group that somebody might want to have a collection of, because some plant groups are enormous. We've got Campanula listed as one of our. We don't have a national plant collection of Campanula registered at the moment, but it is quite a big genus. There's a lot of plants, and for someone to have the space to grow all of those, that's a huge commitment. So for some collections, or where we can, or where it's practical, a person who wants to have a national plant collection could define that they're going to collect the plants that were bred by someone specifically. You've got a collection of Iris bred by Sir Cedric Morris. You've got Iris collection bred by Sir Michael Foster. And that becomes much more manageable and means that different people have smaller sections, of irises, which is also a good thing.
Well, I guess it spreads the collections out a bit as well, doesn't it? So maybe that's a good thing for sort of diversity. So if you've got a collection of irises, say in Cambridge and some up in Doncaster, then it's a sort of nice spread around the country, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, because obviously you get geographical variations, and obviously there's always everyone is always looking out for potential pests and diseases. So if a pest and disease affected one area of the country, you've got a collection in another part of the country. Those plants are safe. You're sort of again looking after the possible risks to the plant.
So, Jill, 2023 is a big year for your for plant heritage. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, 2023 is a very exciting year for plant heritage. In January, as we previously mentioned, we reached the milestone of having 700 national plant collections. I think back in 1984, we had about 200 national plant collections.
Wow.
And it's a number that dips up and down because obviously, we lose collections, we gain collections. But, we're delighted we've achieved 700 national plant collections this year. This is also our 45th anniversary from the inaugural sort of meeting back in 1978. So we're calling it our 45th Sapphire anniversary. And we're going to be celebrating that next week at RHS Hampstead Court Palace Garden Festival. And we've got a special celebration event on the 27th of September in RHS Wisley.
Okay. Wow.
So it is a big year for us, and we're delighted at what we've achieved and where we've come from.
Well, 700 collections is an enormous amount.
It is, yeah.
Just thinking, do other countries have national collections, and where do we stand in the sort of league table? Do you have such a thing?
Not a league table as such. We like to think that we've got a very robust system for accrediting national plant collections. They're accredited by an expert body of people within the UK, and it's quite a formal system.
Right.
But to answer your question, yes, there are other organisations in Australia, in France, I think there's one in Germany, and the USA has different. They're all slightly different though. They're not all exactly the same, but they are where people have recognised collections of plants.
Okay.
Possibly ours is mainly a bit more formal, but I wouldn't like to comment precisely on that one.
Yeah. Better not start an international ruckus.
We've got enough of those going on at the moment. Jill, obviously, Hampton Court, as you mentioned, next week or so. Obviously, it's a big show for Plant Heritage. So, what are visitors likely to see at the show this year?
Yes, we're literally doing all the last minute preparations at the moment. We have a display where with a timeline looking about the last 4.5 decades of plant heritage with some select national plant collections. Squires Garden Centres are very kindly supporting us with a 45th garden where we're going to work with a new national plant collection holder of Persica roses.
Okay.
Daniel Myhill. So we're very excited because it's the first time these roses will have been seen as a national plant collection at RHS Hampton. We're promoting our missing genera. We always like to promote. This year we've got 12 plant groups that we promote where we don't have national plant collections.
Okay.
Because obviously we're always looking to add more collections to the scheme because the more collections we have, the more plants that are saved or conserved and protected. And the bigger the plant community that we can, create, which is, a good thing for us all. We also have our Threatened Plant of the Year competition, which is our 4th year of running our Threatened Plant of the Year competition. And we will be having a public vote on that, which will open up next Monday. It is on our website, the Threatened Plant of the Year and the Missing Genera. It's under the collections and the conservation tabs on our website.
Okay.
So we've got quite a lot of activity, and we also have some special national plant collections doing their own displays. We've got Barry Clark with his Calicanthus and Asclepias and Goldfoot. We have a mini hosta display from Jonathan Hogarth, where he looks at all the ways you should look after mini hostas, right from propagating them to looking after or trying to keep the wonderful slugs at bay. Mm-hmm. And we have Sir Harold Hilliard Garden. And we also have Jonathan Shepherd with his very floriferous national plant collection of cosmos. And we're looking forward to seeing that in flower, which will be wonderful, I think.
Brilliant. Yeah, because we're having a chat to him next, so we're looking forward to learning all about Cosmos and Alesias, so that'll be fun. And do you have a favourite collection of plants amongst all your 700 collections?
That's a really difficult question. I'm someone who likes all types of plants. I do have I particularly like Australasian plants. Okay. I like gum trees and callistum and tea trees, Leptospermum. But I move with the wind, as it were. And I like to learn about everyone and everyone I like because there's something in all of them for me.
Excellent. No, I think that's the best thing about plants, isn't it? They've all got slightly different habits and flowers and smells and all of those sorts of things.
And seasonality as well, isn't it? Yeah, as we go into the different seasons.
Yeah. The great thing about plants is there's one for everybody.
That's very true. Yes. Yeah. And if there's not, there should be one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Jill, how do our Dig It listeners find out more about plant heritage?
Yes, indeed. I'd direct visitors, if they've got a moment, to go to our website. It's plantheritage.org.uk. There's pages you can literally search the national plant collections, so you can find out what national plant collections are in your area, and which national plant collections are open to the public, because they quite often have open days. There's a whole list of events with all the open days listed. We always welcome people's support. We're a membership organisation, so you can have a read at how you can help. But we love more people to get involved and to help and to just enjoy the story of plants, really.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, that's absolutely fascinating, and it's really sort of painted a really good picture. And I'm sure there's many people out there who would love to start a collection. I mean, I went to Chelsea this year and I saw a wonderful collection of Calivias at the show, and one thing which I was amazed at was the fact that you showed the whole process of growing a plant, which I never really knew you grow from seed, right from seed up to maturity. And I think educationally, I think you're doing a fabulous job. I think that's a really important part of what you're doing, and you're doing it very, very well. So that's all good.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time today, Jill. It's been very interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing from Jonathan next about what his collection's all about. It's going to be great.
It's going to be good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jill. So for the second part of this podcast, we're going to be chatting to Jonathan Shepherd, who's the National Plant Collection holder of Cosmos and Alciers. So, Jonathan, welcome to Digit on a glorious summer's day. And maybe you could tell us where we can find you on this lovely day.
Well, firstly, thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here. I'm based in a little village called Brant Bruton, and I get in trouble because a lot of people call it Brant Broughton, and locals of which obviously I'm not, because I haven't lived here for 300 years. Tell everybody off if they don't say it properly. But it's in Lincolnshire, so what you'd see is just very, very flat. They're very proud. It's quite near what they call the Cliff Villages, which me coming from Derbyshire doesn't particularly look like any kind of rolling hills. But we're equidistant from Lincoln, Grantham, and Newark in Nottinghamshire. Oh. So from the back of my plot, I can just about see Lincoln Cathedral 10 miles away in the distance.
Wow. Okay. Excellent. That's a nice view. It's a lovely cathedral, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And we bought this plot. I mean, it sounds silly, is because land was relatively cheaper in Lincolnshire, and so it's this 2-acre plot that we got, I guess, about 12 years ago, and I sort of was scratching my head about, what to do with it, so that we'll probably come on to what I've been doing with it.
Excellent. And I guess that leads us to the first question. What made you've got 2 collections now, haven't you? You've got Cosmos and Alciers.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, I've got. I mean, I'm not that. I think it's quite posh. I just call them the hollyhocks. People know them by their sort of their general name. And I guess how it came about was, I've always been interested in gardening, in a sense that before I went to university, I went and actually worked on a garden nursery in the summer before I headed off to nursery, and they had me cutting thorns off of roses because they were doing the budding, which then put me off roses for the next probably 15 years. I hated the things. And then, went and had a career, and I lived in Brighton, and so you didn't even get a garden there. And quite frankly, I've got a pig shed that was bigger than the flat that I could afford. But I've always been interested in gardening, but purely as an amateur. So this is in no way kind of my job. I'm not good enough to be, what I would call a proper horticulturist. That those kind of people amaze me. So to that end, we got this place with 2 acres because I think green spaces are really important, and we were lucky enough to have it. And was playing around with ideas about what to do with it. I think people had kept a horse on it because there's a dilapidated old stables. Anyway, to cut this sort of rambling story fairly shortly, it was a chance meeting at Hampton Court Flower Show in 2019, and I think that's probably the first flower show I'd actually ever visited. And I bumped into, I can't even remember who it was, somebody from an organisation called Plant Heritage, who I'd never heard of.
Right.
And they had this campaign where they were looking for collection holders of plants which didn't have collections. Well, first of all, I didn't. What did they mean by a collection? So I had a chat with them, and I was astounded that 2 types of plants, which I assumed everybody loved, even though they're not natives, they've been in this country for centuries. They'd be regarded as, to me, cottage garden favourites, and there was no collection. So I thought, I've always enjoyed growing both the hollyhocks and Cosmos. Right. So me being me, always up for a challenge. I scratched my head and I thought, well, what's the worst that could happen here? I spent some time investigating these plants. I grow a few more of them, but it doesn't qualify for a national collection. So at that, literally at Hampton Court, I signed up to Plant Heritage. I went back home and I had a think. I actually filled in forms with proposals to establish both collections literally right away. But decided, a bit more common sense came into it. I thought, well, hang on, let's not bite off more than we can chew. That's how I ended up signing up to doing the London Marathon 4 times, thinking that you could do everything. Don't do anything silly. So I thought, well, the hollyhocks might be a little bit more tricky because they have their own issues. So let's have a go at that.
Right.
So literally, we'll sort of carry on. So my form for this. You have to fill in a proper proposal about what you intend to do and how you intend to do it, and it goes in front of a committee. And it was accepted by the committee, and and again, not wanting to be sort of blow my own trumpet, but I think they would be very keen to accept any kind of proposal as long as it's fairly watertight about what you're going to do. So they gave me a bit of advice, and then fast forward to September 2020, which in one way, shows that the collection is actually really still very quite young, but seems years away now to me. It was awarded full collection status. Now, obviously, there's quite a few steps in between, but that's the kind of timescale that we've been looking at. So the Hollyhock collection has literally, this September, will only have been in existence in its format for 3 years. So compared to some of the collections, which will be, these vast trees that have been sort of in people's gardens or dispersed for centuries or decades, this is a very new collection.
Wow. Gosh, yeah. And how many plants do you need to form a collection?
Oh, crikey. So in my view, that you have to be honest, it would be a bit like, I know there's the Sweet Pea collection, and I think Roger Parsons has done a book, and he's identified that something like, there's been 7,000 different sweet peas named. There's in no way could you almost have them all, because there wouldn't be enough space to do them. So part of my role was almost doing that kind of research, was finding out, okay, well, what hollyhock names are available. So you can get old books where some of these cultivars have absolutely gone extinct. One was called Sutton's, so I contacted, obviously, I'm assuming that it's named
Sutton
after the seed company.
Yeah.
They've never heard of it. So, that's probably completely gone. So I literally did as much research as I could. And I thought, well, look, you can buy plants in, and to me, and it's not cheating, but I felt I was cheating myself. So I think I should try and grow all these from seed.
Okay.
And I got 65 different cultivars, and then you don't just grow one, because ideally, you want probably minimum of 3 plants of each cultivar, but I went for 5, and then I did a plan B and a plan C, and so. It's a bit like, I liken it to, I used to actually, my day job's a political lobbyist, and I used to work for the post office, and people, MPs would ask, how many post offices have you got? And it would be, well, it depends what day you ask, because some are permanently closed, some are temporarily closed, it's 19,000 a day. And and being realistic, it's a bit like that with my collection, because, they're regarded as, depending on who you ask, short-lived perennials. So, in the first year, there were 65. The next year, I had a few, but then I need to check, well, actually, that's not come back. Why has that not come back? Let's log why that it's not come back, so I need to resow and do things like that. So I would, happily say there's 65 individual cultivars, plus then, just because I think I should grow them, if there's a mix of seeds where they haven't sort of separated them into individual cultivars, so there might be a Queenie mix, it'd be called, I would grow that as well.
Right.
So that there'll certainly be a lot more plants than there are cultivars. I then also grow sort of seeds that have cross-pollinated, just because I think, down the borders of the plot, why wouldn't you just add more colour, because the bees and the pollinators love these hollyhocks, even though they're not native. So there'll be a lot more plants, but specifically for the hollyhock collection, there'll be, I would say, there's 65 cultivars, and I'm obviously always trying to add to them. So I discovered last year that there was a new hollyhock that had come out called Purple Rain, and apparently, the seed's been the breeding program's taken about 16 years to get this thing to market.
Oh, wow.
So I'm going to have a go at growing that.
Wow.
And for all I know, I might say, oh, it's wonderful, or I might think, oh, well, that's a bit naff, because that's that. And it's obviously it's all an opinion. But all of a sudden, people come to me which I don't regard myself as the expert, but they'll say, what do you think of this plant? Because, I'm probably the only one growing all of these different ones together. And that opens up so many issues. So, for example, there was one cultivar, I think it was called Blackcurrant World, that was regarded as quite rare or under threat. I've grown it. Now, to my naked eye, without doing genetic tests, it looks exactly the same as Creme de Cassis, which isn't under threat.
Right.
So I'm questioning, well, has a seed company just changed its name for marketing purposes, which absolutely happens all the
Without a
time.
doubt, yeah.
I'm sure it does.
And therefore, it's like, well, who do you provide this information to? And that's part of the purpose of the National Collection is, okay, this is the one place where they're all grown together. This is where we find the information out. There isn't any international registrar for these things. So I've got some of this information and I'll feed it back to either Plant Heritage or to the RHS, and they will do with it what they see fit. So it's an educational process in itself for me, as much as anything.
I was going to say, Jonathan, you're going to have a lot of data. You're going to have a lot of information and cultural growing advice as well, which you can feed into the system. But on your hollyhocks, I mean, how much space do they sort of take up in view of the fact you've got 65 varieties, you're growing 3 or 5 of each? What sort of
crikey. So the way I did it, which is why it's when people think, oh, can I come and have a look at your garden? I always have to be very wary and say, well, it doesn't really look like what I think in my mind people regard as a beautiful formal garden. Because certainly for the hollyhocks, to ensure, to almost separate each cultivars, what I did, and I hate the stuff, but until I've got lots of money, it's what I had to use. I essentially used some weed matting and marked out 100 in a grid system, so it almost looks like a chessboard from Google Maps, 100 1 meter square kind of plots in the ground, and each square had 5 of the hollyhocks in that were then labelled up with a big stake and a proper label and accession numbers and things like that. So that's a fair old space. So I'm, very open to say, look, you couldn't have a hollyhock collection unless you had a big garden. Mm-hmm. But I always say, but don't worry about if people are thinking about doing a national collection, because there are lots of other different types of plants. But quite frankly, some that will be grown in somebody's front room. That there's a national collection of spider plants. So people shouldn't worry thinking that national collections are only for botanic gardens or people with big gardens, because it's not, because there's lots of other plants. But absolutely, it's used a lot of space. But for me, being surrounded by farmland and seeing in some instances monocultures being developed and spraying going on, and I don't use pesticides on the plot. I think it's a good use of this 2-acre plot in Lincolnshire to see, to actually, these national collections are actually quite a valuable now asset.
Definitely. And as you've got so many plants, have you noticed many differences in the way they grow or the length of time they take to come into flower? Or
yeah, to some extent. So I mean, some seem more biennial than others. I know for a fact that if I started sort of sowing some hollyhocks, let's say now or even in September, you can cheat the biennial nature and get flowering within 12 months. I like some of the newer varieties. So some of the halo varieties, which I think were bred by Thompson and Morgan, have lovely flowers, but actually the plants seem to be a little bit weaker, if that makes sense, compared to what you would call the old. I don't like to use the word fashion, because fashion's a big threat to plants, which is why Plant Heritage exists in the first place.
Sure.
But what some people would regard as the old-fashioned varieties, so some of the Niagara, which is a big, robust, and it has almost black flowers, and it's just so striking. Those seem to be much stronger plants. And I'm no expert in breeding, but sometimes I think let's say the overbreeding to get certain aspects on a plant actually can lead to a weaker plant.
Definitely,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And we'll probably touch on rust sort of going forward and some of the issues, but some plants fare better than others. And it's just, again, within 3 years, I still haven't learnt enough, because, it's an ongoing process of, which plants do better in what conditions. There's the constant joke that's always thrown to me with hollyhocks is, what's the point in having a national collection? They love growing in cracks in pavements. Anyone can grow them, which is always amusing when you're, spending money and trying to promote these things.
Definitely. Yeah. And had you grown any before you started your collection, or was it literally let's pick a variety of plant and off we go?
Yeah. No, I mean this was one of the reasons why I was so surprised that there wasn't a national collection. I'd grown them. It was always amusing that in the village, because again, I've not lived here 300 years, I was told you can't grow hollyhocks here. What I think they meant was you can't grow hollyhocks without getting rust, but I think that's the case anywhere. I'd grown hollyhocks and quite liked them and think they're an amazing plant. Saw that there wasn't a collection, and that's why I thought, okay, well, look, I'm not saying I'm an expert at growing these, and we'll obviously along the way, learn more about this plant and some of the things it likes and some of the things it doesn't. So I'd grown some, but for example, what doing a national collection has taught me compared to what I would do, say, in just my everyday gardening is labelling. If I had a hollyhock before, I wouldn't bother labelling it because, quite frankly, I didn't really care about the name or where it was from. It's a nice colour.
Yeah.
Whereas for a national collection, it's like, okay, well, this is a Chater's salmon pink, and oh, hang on, this is another one, and these are very, very similar, and they could be the same, and two companies are calling it the same name. Labelling is far more important.
Okay.
So that was sort of, grown them before, but now it's kind of more, it's the other side of things and doing the labelling that the national collections have taught me.
So I guess all the documenting and keeping records as well, I suppose. What did we plant there if the label's gone walkabout?
Yeah.
It's like,
oh yeah. So for example, in that respect, there's so many fail safes that I've got labels on massive wood stakes, which are on waterproof labels. It's logged on like an Excel file, and that's why the grid system was useful, because even if all the labels fall off, and there is cross-pollination, which we'll come on to, which is almost impossible to stop. And then, as you know, hollyhocks produce so many seeds, so you'll have one that's growing where it shouldn't be growing. But I will know from my log what should be growing in that 1 meter square. And at the same time, Plant Heritage have this excellent database where you can log stuff online and log where it is and put notes and put photographs on, which then can link to the RHS. Now, I don't know how much interest, for example, the RHS has on my hollyhocks. I don't think they have a huge amount, because when you raise stuff like these two are called the same, do I need to tell anyone? It's like, okay, well, you're the expert, so you'll be the one that needs to know this, because there's not enough time for them to be interested in every type of plant. So by doing this, all of a sudden you become the font of all knowledge, and you'll say, well, actually, I think these two are the same. I can't prove it because I'm not a scientist, and but to the naked, but to the naked eye, they look the same. So it's almost, I keep the notes and etc. And it's only if somebody's really interested in it, may they get drawn upon.
Yeah, Jonathan, on your hollyhocks, any sort of special growing treatments which our listeners might glean from your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, what's really interesting, what I found is almost by accident, is that I've got two, for my sins, because this hobby has suddenly become more encompassing. I've got two 72-foot polytunnels now, and partially that's because to do a flower show. But I planted some hollyhocks in the ground in one of the polytunnels. Now, that polytunnel, one day last summer, I accidentally didn't open the doors, and it got to 70 degrees, and some of the plant pots started melting. It got that hot. It still gets to 55 during the summer with the doors open, because I haven't got fan systems and all the rest. These hollyhocks are growing in the ground. No water goes on the ground, because I don't actually generally use it now to grow in the ground. Those hollyhocks come up every year, find their own water, and don't get rust. That to me is fascinating.
Wow.
In the sense that we'll talk about issues with regards to climate change and what we need to have sort of robust landscapes. Well, hollyhocks have been here for 500 years. They're not invasive, even though they're not natives. They can clearly cope with extra heat. They're clearly drought tolerant. They have issues with rust. Now, let's come on to that. That's a big issue that everybody talks about. What do I do to get rid of rust? I have a different kind of perspective, having now grown all these hollyhocks. If you grow hollyhocks, you should manage your expectations. So you should expect to get it. I will never take hollyhocks to a flower show, because in my mind, the only way you can guarantee to not get it is to spray them with fungicide quite a lot. And I've heard of growers, and they openly admit it, to show their hollyhocks they sprayed loads. Now that to me is quite, can be quite damaging to bees. So accept that it will get it, and try and mitigate it. Mm-hmm. So you can buy what's called rust-resistant hollyhocks. Sometimes people misunderstand the meaning. They think it means they won't get it. Doesn't mean they won't get it. It just means they're more robust to standing up to it. So I've got some. They're called Altia ficifolia, the fig leaf ones that will come back every year. They're beautiful yellow ones. They'll get a bit of rust when it's humid and damp. With summers becoming hotter, actually, that's actually helping the hollyhocks. I noticed that last year when it was really dry and hot, the rust had nothing to kind of cling on to. Mm-hmm. Remove all the leaves, destroy them in the way that you see fit. I know a lot of people don't like sort of to be burning leaves in a little incinerator, but if you live in the countryside, that may be more acceptable than other places. Alternatively, give them into your council green waste bin, and accept the plant kind of for what it is. For me, so if you don't like the unsightly leaves, you take them off. It's a back of border plant that you can underplant. And I think it's almost people have to change their perception, because rust is, in Victorian times, it's why they did go out of fashion. They called it the scourge. And when it came, it kind of decimated sort of them as they were being used as cut flowers. They were hugely popular. And then this disease came and their popularity sort of went out of the window and kind of never recovered, and it ever since has been seen as a grandma's plant. So that would be the advice: is don't worry about the rust, and also if you really had to, treat the plant as this short-lived perennial where rust may eventually kill off your plant. So what's the price of a pack of seeds? Grow some more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely.
So that's my advice: is give them a go, and don't be afraid about this kind of thing, because the payback is the amazing flowers that can be 6, 7, 8 feet tall, depending on the conditions.
I say that probably leads us to another question. What's the tallest hollyhocks you've grown on your site?
Oh, crikey! I mean, I think this is where it shows that gardeners can do all they want and put them in the place that they want to. It will be a self-seeded kind of cross that has been about 9 foot tall that looks amazing. That's not a specific cultivar, because it decided that was the place that it wanted. Where it went into some hole where the root could squeeze in, which gave it lots of stability, which is why, that's why you get the joke that they grow in cracks. The reason that it does well in a crack is that it's a massive plant, and that the tap root can go down. And if it gets in there, it's actually quite a good position. It doesn't start rocking, which is a problem when you're growing them in Lincolnshire and it's that flat and 20-mile-an-hour wind. Yeah, we used to be surrounded by conifers which had to be taken out because they'd be constantly snapping in the wind. And when you've got a collection and you're doing it as an amateur, quite frankly, I couldn't even afford to stake them all up, even if I wanted to. So that's an issue. So it will be generally one of the cross-pollinated ones, because they're the ones that it's survival of the fittest, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the seed that eventually comes along is a whopper, whereas some of the halo ones are actually you'd almost regard them sometimes in the growing conditions quite dwarf. Some of them may only come up to sort of waist height, depending on the conditions that you're growing them in, which is no bad thing, because then you can grow that in a smaller garden. This is what I say. There might be a hollyhock out there for everyone.
Excellent. And where do hollyhocks actually come from?
Oh, all over the place. There's sort of Persia, as it was called. You look at the history, and it's various places, but from warmer climates. And places like that. And so there's this huge debate on when they arrived, but it is they reckon around about 500 years ago. So This again comes back to sort of the question of natives versus wildflowers. And I know that I know the RHS are looking more at this, and I have strong views that cultivars actually have as many answers as native wildflowers to changes in the climate. And we know that hollyhocks aren't invasive because they've been around for that long. They're actually grown, I believe, as a crop in Flintshire. They tried to grow it to make cloth out of the fibrous kind of stems, but they didn't have the technology in Victorian times. So they're an edible flower. The Chinese actually eat the leaves. Quite frankly, I wouldn't. Having nibbled on one. I think there are better things. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So some of these cultivars may well have some great answers. It's absolutely full of bumblebees, and so I take the arguments that native flowers attract a wider scope of plants. But we'll come on to Cosmos as well. That some of these non-natives may well extend the season with regards flowering, so that with changing weather conditions, I think we need to look more at some of the stuff that's growing in gardens and whether it can help sort of the wider landscape more robust. And I always use the analogy, people then get worried about that, but it's like, well, apple trees aren't native. Horse chestnut trees aren't natives. We wouldn't go and pull them all out of the landscape. No. They're now adding something that wasn't there. And if we just wait for natives to solve the solution, well, some of the natives might not be able to cope with the changing weather conditions. So, which is why I hope the RHS will be drawing on more of this information from, a bit like they clearly can cope with 55-degree temperatures and find their own water. I think that's quite an interesting thing, and bumblebees love them. Yeah. So I'm doing this next to a farm where he's getting lots of funding for what's called like a wildflower strip, which is not a wildflower strip. It's just grass that's not cut. There's public funding for that. There's no public funding for this as a national collection, which may have some of the answers. I think that's an interesting debate to have, because some of these collections, there's information that's not been used. So I just find it quite fascinating.
Brilliant. No, I think you raise a lot of really good points there, Jonathan. Now, turning to Cosmos, I mean, here at the Garden Centre, we've seen a massive surge in popularity over the years, and I suppose that leads us to stock more varieties, and obviously for you to grow a lot more too.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, that's great to hear that people are not just consider. I mean, it's interesting. It's I think part of the role of a national collection holder, in my view, is to be an advocate of what they grow. I don't think you should be obsessive. So quite frankly, I don't just grow Cosmos and hollyhocks. There's all sorts in my garden. I know some people may well become that obsessed with the one thing they grow, they don't think there's anything else that's great. But I think it's great that people grow more Cosmos. I think if you don't think that they're one of the best plants in the world as a national collection holder, maybe something's wrong. So I'm a big advocate of them. And encourage any and everyone to have a go at Cosmos. It's great. What I found interesting is that many people, when they've seen some of the plants I've grown, they've asked, well, what's that? And it's like, well, it's a Cosmos. What do you mean, what's that? And I'm thinking, well, is it a new? No, it's like the cultivar's been around for ages. And I think it's because they had been used to, in certain garden centres, just seeing dwarf varieties, because that's what, on the whole, that can be shipped in on trolleys 6 racks high from Holland, for example, because that's the most cost-effective way to get plants in. So they'd never seen any of the bigger ones. And they'd be like, well, oh, wow, what's that cupcakes one? Is that new? No, it's been around forever. Oh, is it? Oh, no, pack of seeds. Just buy a pack of seeds and have a go. Or Dazzler, that Monty Donald. I mean, seemingly that's the only Cosmos he grows, but that's a whopper, and you don't often see that in many garden centres. And I understand why, because I've got one outside in a pot that may or may not make Hampton Court that's now bordering on 7 foot tall, so it's going to be awkward to get in a van at the best of times. But that's what the collection can show, is that it's not just one pink one, one white one, one slightly looking red one that's about 7 inches tall.
Yeah.
But that was and I was just, it astounded me, and maybe it was my naivety, that when sort of I did Hampton Court it's the first flower show I've ever done, but when I did it last year, that's what a lot of people who are actually gardeners, in the sense they were coming along on the RHS day, so they'd obviously got an interest in gardening, that's all they thought Cosmos were. So it's great to hear, and I think this is part of my role, to talk about all the different sorts that you can get. That some are bigger, some are a bit more fussy, some are not, and it's great to hear that maybe people are expanding their interest and finding out that Cosmos isn't just a little bedding plant; it can be other things as well.
Yeah, I grew Cosmos Sonata last year. and it didn't come into flower until it was over 6 foot tall. So I obviously did something wrong culturally. It was Jack and the Beanstalk all over again. However, when it started to flower, it flowered right through to the frost in December. So, hey ho, that's the way some plants behave, isn't it? And I suppose this year...
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, what they say is, and it's interesting, is that I need to get this right, and in terms that if I can understand it, then anyone can. Because to me it was quite technical when it was explained to me, is that cosmos is a short day flower. It prefers to flower in days that there's less daylight, so under 14 hours, which is therefore in one way a problem because in the summer we have lots of daylight in this country. So quite often that's one of the reasons why cosmos plants won't start flowering till the back end, is because they've been sown at a time that then the daylight hours are longer and they struggle to flower. So one of the things that happens is that breeders of the seeds produce their seeds in long day countries, which means a long day kind of seed should flower in a long day country and a short day country, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons. And another reason sort of that some people sort of struggle with cosmos is they're too kind to them. So they're natives of Mexico. They sort of in their home, they were grown in poor soil, whereas here they keep feeding them with high nitrogen feed. And so the plant thinks, hey, this is great. I'm going to keep putting on greenery.
And that's why yours got to 6 foot.
Yeah. There you go.
It's not flowering. I'm going to keep feeding it a bit more.
Yeah.
And the plant says, oh, this is even great. I'm still not going to flower. I don't need to flower because I don't need to set seeds. This is wonderful. Which is kind of what I've tried to do with this big dazzler for a bit of showmanship, is to get it quite big, to show that that's what happens. But the advice is don't give it huge amounts of high nitrogen feed, because they'll just love it. And certainly with some of the bigger, the ones that just have a natural propensity to be bigger, will then grow very big and almost tree-like with 3 flowers on.
Yeah.
So I guess, Jonathan, when you started this, I mean, we're talking to Jill earlier about one of the great things that national collectors do is essentially share knowledge, like you've just been sharing with us. Is that something you anticipated sort of being a big part of the role when you started your national collections, or was it you were more interested in just the plants and you thought, oh, better start learning a bit more about these?
Well, I sometimes, I do have imposter syndrome here, because I still kind of think,
more than me about cosmos, and I'm a garden centre owner.
I'm not sure. This, and somebody, I won't name them, but they're obviously like sort of a big buyer and breeder and all the rest of it, one of the big companies, kind of shouted at me and says, if you say, you're not, then that's not true, because I would be coming to you for advice to determine whether to stock 300,000 of these things.
Yep.
And it was like, oh, right. So did I ever anticipate it? No. Do I still feel fraudulent when I go and do talks to gardening clubs? Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, okay, I can talk about, and I've always been, my background's in politics and public affairs. Talking's kind of never been a problem, and I don't mind talking about stuff I know, but I will be very open about stuff that I don't know. And I think sometimes some people have a problem with that, saying I don't know. Yeah. But I still feel a little bit fraudulent. But I think the day you stop wanting to learn and think you know everything, that's the day you should give up. Definitely. And that's the bit I like about the National Collection. I am constantly learning, and I absolutely love sharing it, because why wouldn't you share it? Yeah. You should, you don't want to. Some people like to keep, it's a bit of a power thing. I'm going to keep this information and not tell anyone about it, because then I'll be the smartest man in the room. And the old adage is, well, then you're in the wrong room, aren't you? Mm. So I absolutely love sharing. Well, this is what I do. Oh, a bit like with the high nitrogen feed. Somebody at Hampton Court said, I've just manured this rose thing. Should I put my cosmos? And I said, well, I wouldn't. Well, why? Because I think, well, you can. I mean, you learn more from your mistakes than anything that people tell you. So sometimes go and do it. But my view is that you'll get a load of green triffids and you'll be really disappointed. Yeah. Another example is every year, and I really should probably write about it on Website. Every year, people get sort of the fear of missing out and about sowing seeds. And we all know that on Cosmos Packs it says you can sow from February. Well, yeah, you can. And I constantly am saying, okay, but what are you going to do with your plant in May when there's still a frost? I've got a lot of space to have stuff in polytunnels and do. What are you going to? And even then, I wouldn't really be wanting to sow at the start of February. And then, they've got really leggy. Why is that? I said, because you sowed them really early. So sharing that information that, just wait, just be patient. But I also don't want, because people will say, well, what's the worst that happens? It's like, well, you get really leggy plants and they die. That's the worst. And you've wasted your time. And that's your most valuable resource is your time. So maybe wait a little. This is my wait a bit. The only reason I sowed mine this early is to go to a flower show, because quite frankly, if you weren't aiming for a specific date, the later you sow, the less hassle they are. And sharing that kind of information is great, because then, to get emails back to say, I've grown Cosmos because of your posts on Facebook, and I'm having another go at hollyhocks, and it's amazing.
It gives you a little boost, doesn't it? And I think that's the best thing about gardening, is that we can share our sort of experiences. And I know I was having a chat with my mother, who's the one who's taught me everything I know about gardening, quite literally. And the fact that I was discussing courgettes with her, and the fact that I'm growing one that I tried last year for the first time, and I thought was the best courgette I've ever tried, and it was this little round green one. And she's like, oh, I've never tried that, so this year I've given her some, and hopefully she'll be able to grow them and get the same experience that I did. But and that's just sharing, isn't it? It's just part of being a good gardener, I think.
Most definitely. Yes.
Well, I totally agree. Is that I think inclusivity means lots of things, but within gardening, it also means that there is that community whereby, well, of course you're going to share that information. And so, I now go and end up chatting with lots of people, talking about using peat-free compost, for example, because I do. Yeah. And I get so many people. The quote is often, I'm not going to use the vulgar quote, but all peat-free is useless. It's like, okay. And that's kind of, they want that to be the end of the conversation because they've decided. And it's like, well, the very fact that me as an amateur, so not a professional, and therefore, surely in one way it should be harder for me, can grow medal-winning plants using it, should make you question why you can't grow a tray of seeds. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what you're doing, because I would rather, I want you to be successful as a grower. And, let's be truthful here. In a year or so, you're going to have to grow in peat-free. So instead of bemoaning that it's all useless, you're asking the wrong question. Ask, okay, John, well, how do you do it? Okay, this is what I've learned. Some of it is rubbish that's being sold. Absolutely. Some of it sets like tarmac, one version that when it dried out that I tried. But this is what I do. Let's kind of move together instead of,
just saying it's rubbish.
Because that's not going to help you, because you're going to have no option soon. So it's that kind of, those kind of debates and chats that you can have to, encourage people. And I think that's what it's all about for me.
Jonathan, we chat often on Dig It about, obviously, peat-free. It's a very contentious subject. So for your Aletheas, your hollyhocks and your Cosmos, do you have your own sort of formula, your own magic mix you use for seed sowing, which you'd like to divulge?
No. Yeah, well, I can tell you what I use. So I first of all, I'm trying to be more self-sufficient in terms of compost, because, in terms of trying to be more sustainable, and I always laugh when, I watch the Chelsea Flower Show and you see some things and they're claiming to be fully sustainable. No, you're not. None of us are. We're just trying to improve what we do. So I planted a lot of willow when I was here, and I wood chipped that, and that's finally, it's taken a year or so, a couple of years, and that's making some really nice looking compost that I have to sieve. I think people are almost having to start thinking about that. But in terms of sowing my seeds for both of them, I'm very open and I write about it, and I always say I'm happy to try others, and I constantly try different brands and different makeups. But I use Melcourt Silver Gold purely, I think, for the texture as much as anything, and I think that's what people don't realise. I constantly question lots of peat-free where it says multi-purpose, because I don't think it is multi-purpose. I think now different ones currently can be used for different things. So for example, I would happily use, let's say, New Horizon, which seems more fibrous in planters. I wouldn't use it for my seeds, because if I turn my back and it develops a crust, that crust, it seems rock hard and the seeds don't seem to like coming through. So I use Melcourt Silver Grow, and it works okay for me. People will throw back and say, well, yeah, that's all right for you because Cosmos grow in rubbish.
They'll grow anywhere.
Because I grow other plants in it as well. What I don't accept is when I hear some growers say, I can't grow in peat-free, and then actually what it really means is they haven't really tried and don't want to try until the very last minute, which I think is a bit of a mistake. So I absolutely get that lots of professional growers need perhaps more help and guidance when you're growing as a business. But, I think, the Southern Hemisphere seems to manage without peat. And look, there are issues with all replacements, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And look, my watering regime is really interesting. So I'm very passionate. My collections survive on rainwater that I collect. I collect 20,000 litres of rainwater. So stuff that's in the ground doesn't get watered here and seems to survive okay, but that's because of the things I'm growing. But all the other stuff, it's delivered by hand, and that comes back to the polytunnels in 55-degree heat. That is a chore in itself. And watering using peat-free is very different than using peat. So I don't necessarily think it uses more water. I just think, for me, there's a bigger labour issue, and I am the labour, of having to water more often.
Yeah. Jonathan, so thinking about your hollyhocks and Cosmos, do you have any particular favourite varieties out of the huge number you're growing on your Lincolnshire garden site? Or is that too difficult?
Crikey, that's asking like who's your favourite child. I mean, obviously I was my mum's favourite, but that goes without saying. Look, it sounds a bit naff, but I do believe this. I've always believed that in any garden, every plant has what I call its day in the sun. It's king of the castle, so to speak. So for some that lasts, a week, and for other flowers that can literally be, a matter of minutes where it almost looks perfect. It might be the right light. So, in that sense, I think it depends when you're asking. But in terms of favourites, I mean, crikey, I think I like the halo varieties that I think it was Thomson Morgan when they used to do lots of breeding for hollyhocks. So there's Halo Cream, Halo Apricot, Halo Lavender. I think they're amazing. Slightly smaller than some of the more traditional ones. If you like doubles, and I think doubles still have a role. I know people get a bit sniffy saying that that they're not good for bees. Well, I've seen plenty of bumblebees sleeping in them, so I'm not convinced that they're not good for bees. Some of the Chater's varieties, it was bred by a man called William Chater, and his name's still on them. They're amazing. In terms of Cosmos, again, some of the more traditional ones like Gloria, Dazzler, Purity are great. But then you get ones, and I've mentioned this already, like Cupcakes Blush, which is just amazing. And still the number of people that have never seen it because it looks so different. Apricotta, which came out recently, actually didn't seem that popular at Hampton Court. I don't know why. I think it's amazing. And then this year, I've got a brand new cultivar. I saw some seeds from somewhere called Pink Mosaic. And I think it's amazing. It starts out white, and then whether it's the heat or the sun turns it almost like mottled pink, and it's as if raindrops have touched it and mottled it. It's not rain, that's what it looks like, and it's amazing.
Brilliant.
So that's just some of my favorites, but literally it will change. So when a Rubenza is at its peak, that looks amazing, and it just depends on what time of day and which one's flowered and looking at its best.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a tough question, but no, thank you for your honesty, and that's all good. So next, obviously, you're going to the Hampton Court Flower Show once again, Jonathan. So what can visitors expect on your display in the Plant Heritage stand? Yeah.
So this is. I mean, I am counting down the days. It's in in 6 days, I will be packing a van with whatever kind of looks good. And again, as an amateur grower, just to give sort of listeners an idea, obviously professional growers will know this, I probably sowed 3,000 Cosmos to end up taking 17 terracotta pots with me.
Wow.
Some, and well, in one way, successionally sowing, because when you did it the first year, you kind of think, well, was that a fluke? Did they flower at that time? Is the weather going to be the same? The spring was hugely challenging. I didn't think I was going to have anything growing. And then these last couple of weeks, this is no joke, nearly killed me, because I have been carrying one by one these big terracotta pots in and out. And I mean, when I say in, not just out of the polytunnel, inside the living room, and the house is full of them, and the deck is full of them. So we will get something there. But whether it looks great, that'll be for the judges to decide. But in terms of what can they see, so Plant Heritage will have almost a zone, as I understand it, within the floral marquee. And this year they're at the very back, but that's where all the best people are, is what I tell everybody. In terms of my little stand, it's, I can't remember how big it is, let's say 2.4 meters square, of which, compared to kind of others, my plants won't be in plastic pots that are then hidden by wood chip. My plants will be now, the roots are at the bottom of these big old terracotta pots. And essentially, it will be just a 2-tier square in the middle, and then all around it, with hopefully kind of as many different cultivars as I can fit on. So I worked out that I could probably at most fit maybe 17 of these pots. And then obviously, because it's a Plant Heritage display, you provide some educational material. So that may be about how you sow and grow them. I talk about how, I try to grow sustainably, which would, that comes back to, I don't need to spray the Cosmos with any pesticide. They're grown in peat-free. They're grown using stored rainwater, which I think is going to become more of an issue for all gardeners and growers. I've even got a sign that people really should look out for with a big old cow on it, because I talk about how actually there's research which shows that feeding Cosmos bipinnatus to cows cuts methane emissions by 16%, and methane's probably the most dangerous greenhouse gas above and beyond anything else, and sort of links into kind of how cultivars and these kind of plants may have solutions for other problems that we don't know about. A bit like it's not just about medicines from plants; these things can solve other problems. So that's part of me having to. It's not a tick box; it's part of the role really. That I am judged upon different criteria than purely the plants. If you are, I think it's called the Lindley criteria. So there has to be some kind of educational component there. Mm. So there'll be bits of that. Now, quite frankly, people never really read any of it. So it was amusing last year. I had one mark knocked off because my font was too small. I kid you not. which is why it was not a gold medal by all accounts. Not that I'm still bitter. Anyway,
moving on.
But the public. I mean, I'm honest about this. The public you have to really try and get them engaged on that educational part, because actually they come to a flower show and they want to see pretty flowers and maybe buy some seeds, and that's no bad thing either. And I don't criticise that at all. So hopefully, that's the kind of stuff they'll see, and then Plant Heritage will have, which is, I think it's fascinating. I don't need any more because I'm not allowed any more seeds, but they will have a seed shop of seeds from different plant collections that have been collected. And, people can go up and talk to some of the experts who I call the proper growers. You've got people who, are taking their hostas, who have the national collection of hostas. They'll be able to talk to all the national collection holders, and maybe I'll convince a few people to join Plant Heritage. And wouldn't it be wonderful if, a bit like what I was, they get a new national collection holder in a couple of years from somebody that's seen actually they could give it a go.
Definitely. And talking about sort of shows, do you open your garden up to view so people can come and have a look at all your lovely hollyhocks and Cosmos?
Yeah, it's. I feel quite bad in the sense that these collections was initially set up during COVID, right. So that rules stuff out, and then last year ruled out kind of like the open day, because when you're doing it as just one man on his own, and his wife will take a week off work if it can be really nice to her, and do the flower show. That kind of precluded doing it last year, and it'll be the same this year. So, we've had people come almost by appointment, but we've not been able to do sort of the full open day. It was purely, weighing up, I can't do the 2 collections and a flower show and an open day. And it was juggling those. So we thought, talking with the guys at Plant Heritage, we'll do a couple of the flower shows, and we might have a go at doing the Chelsea Flower Show next year, but I've not told you that. And then what I'd quite like to do is get sort of this site more into what I would, a fit site for people to come and visit. I mean, the issue we've got here in Lincolnshire is rabbits. And I'm so scared that people are going to come and break the leg on all the massive divots. So I need to. The plant's doing fine. It's just where people have to walk around. But yeah, the intention would be then to hopefully have an open day. But in the meantime, people have come and visited and had a look at the cosmos. But I am very open. Doing 10 days at Hampton Court, your own garden suffers without a doubt.
Indeed.
Especially at this time of year.
At least you won't have to be moving quite so many pots backwards and forwards once you finish the show.
I think I did 250 pots for 7. So these initial sowings went down. Some don't make it, and some have fasciation and look ridiculous and all the rest of it. And but terracotta pots wise, there was over 200, and which is fine. But then when the heat kicks in, it's the watering and, so they go outside. And then as we know, sort of this week, then there's storms predicted, which rain's fine. But if, a 20-mile-an-hour wind comes and topples them all over, it can be a bit of disaster. But that, hey, if you don't want to do it, then, don't moan about it, because you know what you're letting yourself in for. So I knew that's what I was letting myself in for. But it's the analogy is, it's Sir Alex Ferguson. It's for me now, it's the squeaky bum time of 6 days. Will they all be okay? I'm bringing them in the house so nothing will destroy them.
And that's, Jonathan, why we do what we do, isn't it? It's all about the anticipation. Yeah. We do like to put our expert guests on the spots, and so if you were ever stranded on that, make-believe desert island, which plant or gardening implement would you like to be stranded with, and maybe why?
Well, I love Secateur. I mean, my wife laughs at me because I don't have OCD in any sense. I'm untidy and all the rest of it. But for stuff I like, I always have to have a spare. So if I have a set of Secateurs, I might have then like my one for best that's still not been used. So I love my Secateurs, and I love my Sneboa tools. But I think I can always get more of them. So I can't get any more of my granddad's galvanized watering can that I have. And you remember him watering his bedding plants that was, crikey, it was alyssum and French marigolds, one after the other in what would now be seen as very old-fashioned. But I've got his watering can, so it'd be that.
Brilliant. And they last forever, don't they? It's such a good thing that tools
better than...
tools from 100 years ago are still going, whereas the ones made 20 years ago have been in the skip for the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
That's it. And have you picked up any good stories you can share with us, a joke or a funny tale from any of the experiences you've had whilst gardening or keeping plants?
I can give you a story that I laugh about now and he laughs about that I didn't find so funny. Literally a year ago, in 6 days. So I've done a couple of things with Adam Frost in terms of sort of pushing the gardening agenda. And when I sent him a message saying I was going to do Hampton Court, I said, I've no idea, how do you get plants down? I mean, I literally had, how do you get plants to a flower show? I have no idea. Yeah. They said, you need to get some of these trolleys. And so I was like, where do you get them? So I had a look on eBay and I bought these trolleys. I said, well, what kind of van do I need? So he said, get a Luton van. Anyway, so it was really helpful. So we got a Luton van, and I made sure my wife drove it in case sort of if it bounced, I'd blame her if all the plants were broken anyway. So she got it into our plot, and she was taking our cat and dog to the kennels because we were going to Hampton Court, and so she left me, and I'm getting these trolleys out, and I put them on the tail lift, and I lifted it up, and no one told me that Luton vans, the back doors aren't all the same size, did they? So I've got 6 of these trolleys, which means there's 24 of these metal posts, all 3 inches too big.
Oh,
So I spent literally a year ago angle grinding 24 of these metal posts 3 inches off the top so they'd fit in the van. Anyway, that's my funny story, which wasn't funny at the time because it does show you kind of some of the crazy things you end up doing to promote your little national collection. And I obviously let Adam Frost know this regularly, that it's down to him that if you see my trolleys, they're all cut at a quirky little angle. The top 3 inches have gone off them.
Brilliant. Well, at least now, Jonathan, we know where to go if we need some slightly shorter Danish trolleys than everyone else uses. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I know how you can do it really quickly.
But they're handy bits of kit, aren't they, for transporting plants?
Yeah.
And, but like you say, they are quite tall. But equally, we do have some extension pieces at the garden centre that we use. So if you need to put an extra shelf back on yours, just let us know and we'll give you some extra ones.
I can put them back to their original height.
Jonathan, how do our Dig It listeners find out more about your wonderful national collections?
Oh, crikey. Well, they could. I've got a very poor website. If they want to check out BritishCosmos.com, they could probably find out bits and bobs what I'm doing. They can always find me on Twitter or Instagram at the J Shepherd, which is SHEPPARD. I think my website has a bit of a blog and a seed shop, which has some of probably has more Cosmos seeds on it than any seed company, actually. And then, of course, people should probably have a look at the plantheritage.org.uk website for more information about national plant collections in general.
Brilliant.
That's great. Thank you.
Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I've learnt so much about both hollyhocks and Cosmos. I must admit, I would have to look at my feeding regimes. I don't want Triffid Cosmos this year. By all means, I'm going to have to treat them
mean.
That's indeed,
that's it.
Excellent, great stuff.
Thank you very much for your time today.
No, it's been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Today's show was brought to you by Buckingham Garden Centre and Nurseries. The show was hosted by Chris Day and Peter Brown. The show was produced by Peter Brown. And our thanks to Chiltern Music Therapy for providing the music. Thanks for listening.
At Chiltern Music Therapy, we want everyone to know the difference that music can make in their lives. From parents and their premature babies in hospital to grandparents with dementia. We provide music therapy and community music services to people of all ages and needs across England. We work both digitally and in person in people's homes, care homes, schools, hospitals and hospices. Find out more at chilternmusictherapy.co.uk.